Syria, which I will abbreviate as NES. It's a form of autonomy which emerged against the background of war in Syria, also war in Turkey, and an implosion of the state in large parts of Syria. And I will argue that this is an autonomy which does three things. First, it's an autonomy which interrupts the social ordering by capital and the social ordering by the state. And second, but also relatedly, it's an autonomy which is based on the development of self-activity. What is referred to in the autonomous literature, at least the autonomous literature I know from Italy in the 1960s, a form of autonomy which is referred to as self-valorization. And third, I would argue it's an autonomy which is founded on a politics of connectivity. So these are the three main things: interrupting, ordering by the state and capital, self-activity, and connectivity. My main takeaway from the talk is that this is an autonomy which isn't defined as territorial or non-territorial. It's an autonomy which does not necessarily separate. It's an autonomy which we could refer to as an extraterritorial politics of connectivity between people and between collectivities. It connects through space. It's an autonomy which is not concerned with borders, nor with withdrawing borders. Yet at the same time, without taking borders as the object of its actions, it implicitly renders borders irrelevant, I would argue. This concept of autonomy, this understanding of autonomy, and Cengiz already told a bit about the backgrounds of this concept. This concept of autonomy was important in the Kurdish movement in Turkey. However, the self-organizing structures have been severely repressed in the developments after 2015. The concept of autonomy, or this concept of autonomy, also played an important role in the reconstruction of war-torn areas in Syria, and in the construction of an alternative form of administration in NES. And this post-war reconstruction did not entail the recovery or a recovery of state institutions and a development of the economy through its connections to a world market, but it was based on a reimagination of social and societal relations beyond subordination to the state and beyond the subordination to the state as a single authority, and the reimagination of community and communal relations after the imposition of the monoculture of nationalism, as we have seen in Syria, and as we have seen and still see in Turkey. This autonomy in the NES region became defined as a practice of self-constitution. I already mentioned that. And it's the ability, self-constitution, the ability to sustain oneself politically, economically, and culturally. And this understanding of autonomy was developed both as an idea and a practice over the last 2 decades. We have seen it after 2015, but it was already some kind of working practice over the last 20 years, gaining momentum in Nes or in Rojava after the implosion of the state in 2012. The idea of autonomy, which we see emerging in Nes, should be distinguished from another different and contradicting practice of autonomy that has emerged also within the Kurdistan region, but mainly in the Kurdistan regional government in northern Iraq. And these two contradicting ideas of autonomy are linked also to two contradicting or two different currents in Kurdish politics. The practice of state formation, which we have seen in northern Iraq, is linked to the Kurdistan Democratic Party, a party which emerged in Iraq and before that with roots in Iranian Kurdistan. It stimulated a form of proto-state formation. The party made an attempt to succession in 2017 by organizing a referendum, an independence referendum, you might have heard of that, which strongly backfired. So that's one current of autonomy which I will not discuss, but I wanted to mention it because very often the Kurdish movements in northern Iraq focusing on state formation, and the Kurdish movement in northern Syria and in Turkey, which is not focusing on state formation but on something very different, are confused with one another. That practice, which is not focused on state formation, is constituted, I would say, by a movement of parties and social movement inspired by Abdullah Öcalan, and that's a thinker, a political leader, already referred to by Cengiz. He used to be the chair, the leader of the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, but today I would say he is considered a symbolic leader of a swarm of parties and social movements which are somehow coming together in the umbrella organization of the Association of Communities in Kurdistan. Association of Communities in Kurdistan, so not of Kurdish communities, which is described by the PKK itself or by the KCK, the community of the Association of Communities in Kurdistan. The abbreviation is KCK. Is described by themselves as a movement which struggles to establish its own democracy, neither grounded on the existing nation states nor seeing them as an obstacle. One of the arguments which is made within the movement is that modern institutions, the state, capital, have undermined the self-constitution capacities of people. And this is an argument which is made within the movement, which very strongly connects to work of Ivan Illich from the 1960s and 1970s, who also looked upon modern institutions as undermining the self-constituting capacities of people. Cengiz already explained the two concepts which they developed in order to somehow work with this idea of self-constitution. That were democratic autonomy and democratic confederalism. And I would say that democratic autonomy refers to the capacity of people to take decisions over their own lives and determine their own future. And democratic confederalism is a bottom-up system for self-administration. And the one is a principle, you could say, for self-determination beyond the state. The other one is an organizational model. Maybe partly a repetition with Cengiz, but for decision making and administration, a system of councils has been established in NES at the level of streets and villages, of neighborhoods, districts, cities, cantons and regions. They all have a 40% gender quota. They also work with a co-chairing system within all those councils, and at the division between entities, as has been mentioned by Cengiz. And you could say, well, this is a form of a territorial organization, bottom up. But at the same time, what we also see is that different communities have a say over their own affairs. Different religious, ethnic communities can decide about the things which are, or they consider, relevant in relation to their religion, or how they want to teach and organize institutions for language education. They can decide about that themselves, but there are not others who make decisions about their language education. It's their decision. So you could say there is a territorial component in the way they're organized, but there's also a cultural component and a categorical component. The women have also the separate organizations, and the youth also have the separate organizations. So what you see emerging is a kind of a multi-layered territorial and non-territorial form of administration in the region. Let me see. I think I will just skip a few things so we have more time also for an exchange of ideas, for discussion. Okay, let me just conclude. I would say that democratic confederalism and democratic autonomy, partly repetition, does not take the state as its main frame. It does not take borders as the main objective. It's a way of thinking and doing which tries to be non-statist. And in this frame of reference, self-constitution, self-organization is the main concept from which they work. It's also a working practice. When I went for the first time to Rojava, it looked very different from how it looks today. It's in a way it's inventing itself and it's developing itself. It's I would also say a radical engagement or an engagement with actual situations without limiting themselves to what exists. It tries to create a new imaginary about government and about governing. Thank you very much.